Just as learning to navigate your viewports is crucial to beginning to work inside of a 3D application, so is making selections a very important part of your modeling process. So if you can't properly select the things that you want to work on, it makes it much more difficult to actually get the work done. So we're going to look at some of the methods that Modo has for selecting any kind of object that you need to while you're working. I'm going to start by adding in just a basic sphere by holding down the Shift key and clicking on the sphere icon. You can see now we have a layer named sphere and a sphere in our viewport. So this will allow us to start looking at the different ways that we can make selections. All right, so we can select any number of things inside of Modo. We can select individual items by entering item mode. So now I can click on that sphere and select it, click off of it to deselect it. All right. And then once you have individual item layers selected, you can also select their individual components. So those are going to be the vertices, the edges, and the polygons. So let's start by looking at vertices. The most direct way to make a selection is simply to click and drag across the surface of your object. As the mouse overlaps a vertex or an edge or polygon, if you're in that mode, it will become selected and it will be highlighted in orange. Now you can change this color if you'd like in the preferences, but most of the time orange is probably fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a selection of a few points here, and you can see that I have those selected, and now I'm not selecting anymore because I'm just navigating around my viewport. If I want to add to that selection, I can hold the Shift key and then continue to click and drag across, and more vertices will be selected. If I want to deselect, say I don't want these 4 vertices in the middle selected, I'll hold down the Control key and click and drag across those. Now, the Shift key and the Control key are mutually exclusive, which means that if you hold the Shift key and you click and drag across a vertex or an edge or polygon that are already selected, it won't deselect them. Likewise, if you're holding the Control key, you won't select something that isn't currently selected. So Shift to add to your selection, and Control to remove from your selection. So that can allow you to more properly trim the selection that you're making. So left mouse clicking and dragging is the first way that you can make selections. You can also use the right mouse button to click and drag around to make a lasso style selection. So I'm going to select the top of the sphere here, and once I release, you'll see that I have a bunch of vertices selected, everything that was inside of my selection. But if I mouse around to the back, you'll see that nothing on the back was selected. That's because in a shaded viewport, the default selection method is called a raycast selection, which means that we're only going to select the things that are actually visible in our perspective. Now, in one of the orthographic views, that isn't the case. So if I do the same thing in this right-hand view, which right now looks to have a very similar selection to the top view, but if I do the same thing, right-click and drag around and release, we'll see that it has actually selected all of the vertices all of the way through. Now, if you want to select everything, even though things that are invisible, well, in a shaded view, you can just hold down the middle mouse button and click and drag around, and then you'll get that same selection method. Likewise, in the wireframe or the orthographic viewports here, if you hold middle mouse and click and drag, it will use that raycast selection inside of the wireframe view. So you can see, even though I've drug around the top half of the sphere, only the part that is facing this current perspective, or the right-hand side, was actually selected. So shaded views, right mouse click selects only what's visible, and in wireframe views, right mouse button selects everything that's inside of your lasso, and those flip-flop by using the middle mouse button. So middle mouse, everything gets selected in the shaded views, and middle mouse in the wireframe views, only what is facing your current perspective is selected. All right, so that's one way that we can select things. Now, oftentimes, however, we'll want to work with loops of geometry, either edges or polygons or vertices, and you can select an entire loop with vertices just by selecting 2 vertices that will denote the direction that you want to select. So you'll define the loop. So we can see we've got a loop that's going to be running around the sphere here. And then if I press the L key, it will select all of the remaining vertices in that loop. All right. Now the same thing works in polygon mode. So let's hop over to polygon mode. If I select 2 polygons and press the L key, the entire loop of polygons is selected. Now, this is a little bit different in edge mode, because an edge, by definition, is only going one direction. So a loop of edges is only going to go around the sphere this way. So you can press the L key, but you only have to select one edge, Or you also have the option of just double clicking on an edge, and that will select all of the edges in that current loop. This also works in other directions. So if I double click on an edge running vertically, you can see it selects the loop all the way around the sphere. Let's hop over to polygons now. Now, another option that you have is selecting in patterns. And this is something that can really be a big time saver. And this just requires you to define a pattern of selected and non-selected items. And the same thing works with edges and vertices. I just think it's a little easier to see in polygons, so let's try it here. So I'm going to start by selecting this polygon here. Great. Now I'm going to skip a polygon, hold the Shift key, and select the next polygon. All right. Now if I use the up arrow key, you'll see that it continues that selection pattern and goes all the way around the object, selecting every other polygon. I can also do other patterns like select one, skip two, up arrow, and I move around skipping 2 polygons. The same thing happens with any other number that you may want to skip. Now, sometimes you'll want to actually select multiple polygons next to each other, and this will actually require a couple of selections. So let's say I want to select 2 polygons and skip 1 and select the next 2 and skip 1. So in order to do that, I would have to first select 1, skip 2, select 1. Then I can use the up arrow button to go around. Now I can define the second set of selections, which is going to be the next polygon, and then skip 2, including the already selected one, and go to the next one. And then again, with the up arrow, I can go around, and now I have 2 adjacent polygons selected with a hole in the middle. Now, this can be something that is a big time saver if you take a moment to think about what you want to select before you start actually grabbing and making selections. You can really end up saving a lot of time. Moving on, you can also use the arrow keys to select different parts of a selection or to expand or shrink your selection. So let's go back to selecting a loop. I'm going to select a couple polygons and press L. And if I use the left and the right arrows, you'll see that it is actually changing my loop selection to my next or my previous loop. And the way that it defines next or previous is something like if you select a couple of polygons and you think about the direction that you're going. So I'm going to just maneuver down here. We're going to pretend that this loop of polygons is a road. So I'm selecting this one and then that one. So I'm going that way down the road. I press L to get the entire loop. And now if I'm looking at it the direction that I selected, the left arrow will select to the left, and the right arrow will select to the right. Now, if you're going the other direction, so let's select the 2 polygons coming towards my view and press L, the left arrow will make you go to the right because it's actually facing the other direction. So this is a good thing to remember so that you know which arrow you're using to move which way on your selection of loops. So let's move back up to here. Now, building on that, if I hold down the Shift key and use the left or the right arrows, I can actually add the adjacent loops, either left or right. So hold Shift and left, and I get that loop selected. Hold Shift and right, and it will actually move back to my current loop or the first loop, and then hold Shift and hit right again, and it will move up to the next loop up there. And then if I hold Shift and hit right again, we'll see that we continue making these selections, and we're expanding our selection by adding the adjacent loops. Now, in addition to that, you can also grow and shrink your selection. So this is with Shift and the up and down arrows. So hold Shift and press up, and it will select all of the polygons. It also works in vertices and edges, but it will select all of the adjacent components. So I just had the 1 polygon, hold Shift and up, I get all the adjacent polygons, hold Shift and up again, all of the adjacent polygons. Shift and down will take the outermost ring of your selection, in this case these polygons, and it will decrease it down till you get to nothing. So if you have only one set of polygons, so for example these 3, there's nothing around or nothing on the inside. If I hold Shift and down, it will actually deselect and you'll go down to nothing. So using these methods for selection, either paint selecting with the left mouse button, using the right or center mouse button to lasso select, using Shift to add to your selections, Control to delete from your selections, and then using the combination of your arrows and your Shift keys, you can very quickly get a pretty complex selection made, and it will allow you to get your modeling done faster and more efficiently. So that does it for basic selections. In the next lesson, we'll move on to more complex ones. I'll see you then.